Anybody else want coffee?
Hello.
Somehow I need to find, you can find him, but I'll pay close attention to that.
Okay, well, you're in luck. Today, more than probably any other week, I'm gonna be doing more excerpts, just because
Recap.
it's a recap, it's setting the stage, it's like, I can't say it any better, I don't even want to summarize it, so more than other weeks, I'll be just reading out of here. But this sets up the rest of the book, okay, this is, we've had his personal background, we've had his, thoughts on science, his thoughts on theology, how he likes the systems, and how his concept of God was, fading in terms of everything he learned about the world and what, and he's also talking about how he wasn't alone in that maybe not just him, or maybe not just for his reasons, but for many reasons, a lot of folks have been fading from the church and from religion. You maybe have heard that a few times, that people will say, well, I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious, right? There's something about church or organized religion that has been connecting with people. And we had a great conversation last week, no pressure, but let's see if we can maintain that. But it was, if our life is messy, and if the church isn't somehow speaking to that or saying Jesus came into your mess, then there's a disconnect. And for him, that had to do with science and the cosmos and these evolution and geology and all these big things. But that's not the disconnect for everybody. But I think there was a theme there, that there's something that's not connected. So today we're going to get into the book of Job and talk about a disconnect between everything Job believed and was brought up with, and that all falls apart for him. And so that's what we're getting into today. So this is a setup for the rest of the book, and it's sort of a response to the first couple of chapters. So we start off with the fifth dentist, and he tells the story of a professor of his who quoted a TV commercial for, was it Trident? Yeah. Trident sugar-free gum. 4 out of 5 dentists recommend Trident sugar-free gum. And he says, well, yeah, of course, it's sugar-free. Dentists would want you chewing on sugar. He said that makes sense. And so he says, this is a great mystery that must be investigated. On page 34. I'm going to start at that kind of larger paragraph in the middle there. He says, if you step back from the Bible and blur your eyes a little, the biblical narrative arc stands up clear enough. We are made good, indeed, very good. We manage to mess things up, and we find that we can't fix ourselves. God reaches out for us again and again, and eventually calls forth the nation of Israel to represent God in the world. Out of Israel comes Jesus of Nazareth, in whom God takes the step of becoming one of us. This somehow reconciles us to God. There are plenty of different theories about how this happens, but the important thing is that it does. Atonement theories, they're called. We now live our whole lives while anticipating Christ's return and the full consummation of history, which is sort of our topic in church today in our readings. He says there, however, that is imagined. Some say it's a future event, some say it's happening even now, all the time, some think both are true. On this largest of scales, it's a pretty simple story, moving from intimacy to alienation and back. But if you look a little bit closer, you'll see that not all the Bible is involved in the telling of this story. Some of it is not easily located within the narrative arc. Some of it looks inward. Some of it observes. It is, if you like, commentary. Much of this literature has a rather intellectual and existential tone. In some places, it is empirical, which, it's like provable, right? Scientific, empirical evidence, and pragmatic. In others, it bends in a reflective and universal direction. Overall, it is concerned with living faithfully within the daily workings out of the world, and therefore values observation and reason over revelation. Though seated in a theological context, it is not religious in any conventional sense of the word, but it is in the canon, and it is called wisdom. Biblical wisdom literature is not monolithic in its perspective. Just peek down at the footnote there. It's comprised of the books of Proverbs, Job, and Ecclesiastes, and several Psalms. If you have a Bible with the Apocrypha, like the books that didn't make the cut, but in Protestant churches, but maybe Catholics or Orthodox would count them as scripture. There's another example there called the Wisdom of Solomon and Sirach. It's written from a number of angles. For our present purposes, two major positions are emphasized. Like our cadre of dentists, wisdom literature provides a majority report and a minority report. Our true interest lies with the minority, but first you got to talk about the majority. So before we jump into that, are you familiar at all with this kind of subsection, this genre of the Bible, wisdom literature? Ecclesiastes, Proverbs, Job. Like you've heard of it, or like you dig it? Like where are we at with this?
I've heard a lot of this will take a lot of stock in Proverbs and telling how women should act. That's what Proverbs.
Proverbs is a grab bag. You can find anything.
Yeah. I don't remember what chapter it is, but they call themselves Proverbs, some chapter.
Okay. Yeah, Proverbs is unlike any other book. Ecclesiastes still has sort of a flow to it, right? It's this grumpy, wise teacher, just saying, it's all vanity. This is dumb. This is all chasing after it. None of this matters, right? We're all gonna die someday, right? So there's still a flow to it. Job has a story and an arc, and we're gonna spend a bit of time.
Well, it says it's to steer a reader away from folly,
That's right.
I
which
just remember.
sounds boring.
I just remember it's Proverbs 31.
Okay, I'll check that out.
You know,
Isn't there a group called Proverbs something?
that's what I was talking about.
Yeah,
Proverbs
that's
31. And it's women.
Okay.
Yep,
And it's women.
it's about putting women in their place, right?
Oh, come on.
Your strength on women, you're on those who ruin kings.
Say it again.
The group is women.
Listen, my sons, and the answer to my prayers. Do not spend your strength on women. You're bigger on those who ruin kings.
Yeah,
There's other person.
Yeah.
I feel like just even reading scripture, like if you think of David and Bathsheba, Bathsheba didn't ruin David, David ruined David.
That's right.
She was minding her own business.
Right.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah.
So one of the David was that one of the known character you can find, she's far more than she is worth far more than rubies. Her husband has full confidence in her, in fact, so nothing of value.
Okay,
Clothed with strength and dignity.
Yes.
She laughs at fear and
well, maybe we can come back to Proverbs. It's a tough book because it doesn't have a narrative. I mean, there's some passages about lady wisdom, let's say, and that's cool. But a lot of it's just verse after verse after verse of like these little one-liners or couplets that are just little bits of wisdom. And well, we're gonna talk about it in a second, but it doesn't like it. You really can just pick and choose if you want it. But at the same time, if you try to take it as a whole, in a very broad sense, like like Don said, it leads you away from it. But it's not like the other books in the Bible. So yeah, wisdom can be hard because we're used to histories or commandments or the gospels or Paul's letters. Like we're comfortable with that. We kind of understand how those work. We understand their shape, their rhythms, and then you get into this stuff and it just has a different feel. If you go to like a Jewish, a Hebrew Bible, the order of the same books are there, but they're ordered differently. And they take all of this stuff and kind of stick it at the back. So the way our Old Testament is laid out, you have sort of the narrative histories, Genesis all the way through Ezra, and then you get and Esther, and then you get Proverbs and Psalms and Job, and then you get a bunch of prophets. Ecclesiastes is actually right before Isaiah. So they stick the wisdom literature right in the middle. Either way, it people don't really know what to do with it. It doesn't fit the same way. Okay. Okay,
I
so
like that in the end of that middle paragraph. He sits down these men and he says, for a successful life, fear God, exercise moderation, tell the truth, show compassion for the weak and marginalized. Do not let wealth go to your head, give to the poor,
Where are you?
and stay away from strange women. Page 35.
Oh, I was just about to read that.
But you know, all is pretty well true today.
Yeah.
That's what, wisdom does not have a.
No.
expiration date.
Well, let's read that whole section. The majority, this is the four dentists, the four dentists, the majority opinion, Proverbs. The majority opinion is well represented by Proverbs, a book composed largely of teachings meant to steer its reader away from folly and toward wisdom. It is pragmatic, okay? The original audience for the book was likely young men who were soon to leave home and make their way in the world. This is a graduation speech, maybe. I don't know. The sage of Proverbs may fairly be viewed as a patriarch, established, secure. You can imagine him sitting down at the hearth with his male progeny to tell them how to live a successful life. Fear God, exercise moderation, tell the truth, show compassion for the weak and marginalized. Do not let wealth go to your head and give to the poor. Stay away from strangers. Do these things and you will have your reward: security, progeny, happiness. The message of Proverbs is in some ways complex. You cannot simply take any of its aphorisms alone. For example, one might be tempted to read 26:4. Do not answer fools according to their folly, or you will be a fool yourself. To suggest that it is best not to engage certain people in certain arguments, lest you risk being identified with them, or, as the phrase goes, dropping to their level. That's good advice, right? But the following verse says, answer fools according to their folly. It says, answer fools according to their folly, or they will be wise in their own eyes. And that warns you that your silence will only build up those who are ignorant. Presumably, the point of such juxtapositions, there are many, is to encourage a kind of balance and thoughtfulness that will lead in the end to wisdom. So don't talk to them, but you better talk to them. Right? Don't sink to their level, but don't ignore them completely. Despite such local and necessary ambiguities, however, the overall morality of Proverbs is not clouded by complexity or concentrated by paradox. A look beneath the surface reveals that the book's moral logic is undergirded by the single and simple equation of reward and punishment. Righteousness leads to success, and foolishness leads to ruin. This equation shows up explicitly in a number of places, for example, chapter 1, verses 33 and 34. Waywardness kills the simple, and the complacency of fools destroys them. But those who listen to the Lord will be secure and will live at ease. In other places, the equation is pronounced and seems to justify even the excesses of so-called prosperity theology. If you're not sure what that is, just think Joel Osteen, right? Live your best life now, the Lord will prosper you, like making weird verbs, that didn't exist before. So the Lord will prosper you if you're doing well, clearly you've been blessed. And if you're not doing well, then you're doing something. Yeah, that's that whole sort of sort of naughty and nice
What's
list.
the one book of Job teaches?
What's that?
That's the opposite of what the book of Job shows.
Right. Yep. So, but Proverbs, it fits there, or at least it's close enough that people turn, like Lois was saying, people turn to Proverbs in that sort of branch of Christian teaching and theology all the time. Misfortune, it says material gain is a sure sign of God's favor. Misfortune pursues sinners, but prosperity rewards the righteous. How many people do you know who are like salt of the earth, stand-up people, give the shirt off their back, and cannot catch a break? Right? This does not on track. The good leave an inheritance to their children's children, but the sinner's wealth is laid up for the righteous. These are, I mean, I'm getting ahead of myself here, but like, what about Mother Teresa? Is she therefore a sinner because she's poor? Like, come on. Or is this metaphorical? Is it riches of some other type?
Explain that to me.
Which one?
I don't know, I'm just, the good leave an inheritance to their children's children,
Uh-huh.
but the sinner lays it up for the righteous.
So the good, that means you're righteous, that means your wealth will pass on generation to generation. But the sinner's wealth, the righteous are gonna get that too, because you're a sinner. And
That's not what it said. It says the good leave an inheritance to their children's
Right.
children.
Yep.
But the sinner wealth is laid up for the righteous.
Yep, so the sinner doesn't get to keep their wealth, it'll go
Okay,
back to the
right,
righteous.
Somebody else.
Is it to somebody who's not a family member in other words?
Or they will fall into ruin, and
Yeah.
the good righteous people will pick up the pieces.
But it's also just a metaphor for being a good steward of your money. And
Yeah.
being a good steward of what God's given to you to be able to pass on to your family. It doesn't necessarily has to be financial, it can also be wisdom and
Sure.
the ability to handle and be righteous and those type of things.
And that's the thing with Proverbs, it doesn't say, this one's a metaphor, you know,
Right.
it's open to so much interpretation. But overall, that like he's saying. Righteous equals good, sinner equals bad. Righteous equals prosperous, sinner equals not prosperous. That's kind of how Proverbs lays it. He says, I do not wish to make a caricature of Proverbs, which I just was doing, which also contains more subtle expressions of its underlying moral mathematics. Moreover, the book occasionally confesses that human wisdom is incapable of grasping all mysteries. But for the most part, the book is exceedingly optimistic about the effectiveness of human observation and reason when it comes to daily life. And its final message is simple. One who truly seeks wisdom will be rewarded with the good life. And in the most conventional sense of that phrase, virtue, prosperity, happiness, health, publicacy. If one plays by the rules, in other words, one may win at the game of life. The Lord is just, so how else could things be? We call this conventional wisdom. It is a dentist who recommends sugarless gum. It is what you tell the kids. It is wisdom of the commencement speech. God helps those who help themselves variety. And it dominated the thinking of ancient Israel just as it dominates the thinking of 21st century Americans, who love nothing more than winners that win big by digging in, working hard, and playing by the rules. Right? The underlying equation of Proverbs may be expressed if A, then A. If you do good, then you'll get good. Follow God's commands, seek wisdom and righteousness truly, and God will grant you health, a large family, much land, and sizable herds of livestock. If you don't, then you'll have a fairly miserable life, and not many people will like you. Either way, you won't go to heaven when you die, or either way, you won't go to heaven when you die because that wasn't a concern of Jewish folks at the time. Their afterlife was all the same place, Sheol, shades of yourself when they say go down to the pit, right? That there wasn't this sort of heaven and hell dichotomy.
They can thank Christians for that,
Yeah.
they believe it.
But following the path of wisdom will ensure your good name and plenty of progeny up here on the surface. All right, so that's the four dentists. That's sort of the prevailing conventional wisdom. I'll just check in. Any comments, questions on that part?
Well, there's a lot of underlying truth to that. I mean, yes, it's not always the case, but there's
Give them a better shot.
if you want to increase your odds.
Yeah.
Yes.
Following the book of Proverbs is not a bad thing to increase your odds of being successful in life.
Yeah.
I mean, just as a general, if you want to play the mathematics, not play the lottery,
Yeah.
it's logical. Yeah, it is.
Are there exceptions? Are there cases where through no fault of your own or through somebody else's, shadiness, it's dealt you a hand that you can't recover from?
All
Sure.
people that invested in Enron, right? Those people that, doing something like that, they were kind of doing the right thing.
Which is why there's all the commandments about not cheating your neighbors and running a good business. Okay.
And working with them, with the charity, you see a lot of it, I mean, we don't know, I don't know their background. But they seem like very good people who've had some really tough luck.
I mean, how many stories have you heard of, say, cancer wiping out your life savings? And then you're on the street, obviously. So, yeah. But overall, it usually stands. That's why it's 4 out of 5. Now we get the fifth sentence. Sure.
I don't know about the business, why is he telling you to shoot sugar gun just so you get more business or?
Maybe just savvy, All right, so here's the next part. So the Job is the book Proverbs might warn children about. I love that. In it, the equation is precisely inverted. If A, then negative A. If you do good, if you are blameless in God's sight, if you are morally irreproachable, if you seek righteousness truly, then God will kill your family, destroy your house, obliterate your livestock, and kick your sorry, just in case the kids were listening on the recording. All right. So maybe not God exactly, but God will stand by and watch while somebody else does. Okay. A strange and troubling word to be sure, but that is to be expected. Job, after all, is none other than the fifth dentist. So we're gonna look at that now. So page 38. Job loses everything but his cool. We meet our hero under clear skies. Standard wisdom has played itself out just as Proverbs said it would. Job, our model of righteousness, has prospered. He is a good man, the best of men, really, exemplary in every way. He makes his home in the land of Uz, far beyond the Jordan. He is an established leader, a model patriarch, the father of 7 sons and 3 daughters, the greatest of all the people of the East. Beyond his copious offspring, he is wealthy in all the ways wealth was counted in his world. 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 donkeys, and very many servants. He and his children live in large houses and enjoy good health. Food is plentiful and feasts are common. In keeping with the standard wisdom, Job's material blessings are signs of his righteousness. And truth be told, he is a genuinely good man, committed not only to his family and others of means, but to the poor and marginalized. His generosity works with his keen sense of justice to ensure that the needs of the downtrodden are met. Chapter 31, he describes himself accurately as one who delivers the poor and the orphan and causes the widow's heart to sing with joy. For his benevolence and commitment to the poor, he is held in high honor by the young and the aged. Nobles and princes fall silent when he speaks. If Job is publicly judicious and compassionate, he is privately pious. He makes a habit of interceding for his children before the Lord, offering burnt sacrifices for each of them on a regular basis, so that his piety covers their sin in case they themselves fell into error. The source of Job's wisdom is, per Proverbs, his fear of the Lord. He knows before whom he stands. Right? So far, so good. Or does he? And his wisdom and righteousness, is his wisdom and righteousness truly disinterested? Or are they contingent on his manifold blessings? Perhaps Job's fear of the Lord is only a byproduct of his many years living on the sunny side of reward and punishment. What, we might ask, would Job do if that venerable equation were to no longer hold? Would he still fear the Lord, or would his prayers turn to curses? And that's the question of the book of Job. After Job's status as a pious and popular patriarch is established, drama cuts to heaven. We talked about this back in Lent when we were talking about what does the Bible say about Satan and the devil. So Hasatan, right, the accuser, full member of God's court, eventually becomes, part of the road to what our concept of Satan is. And we know the story. He's like, hey, where you been, Satan? And Satan says, just walking on the earth. And hey, have you considered Job? And it says, the Lord freely, without having been provoked, says, hey, do you know Job? He's blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from evil. And he says, try as I might, I have found it impossible to read this as anything but a taunt. You think you're good at what you do you? Well, I bet you can't find fault with this one. The accuser is undaunted, and that's when they kind of agree to this kind of a wager or this test. Well, do everything to Job, but don't touch him while they take away his house, his livestock, his riches, his children, everybody's gone, except his wife. It's just down to Job and his wife.
One of the things I find parallel to this was the Greek gods.
Okay.
They would do the same thing. Well, they were roughly about the same time frame, are they not?
Compared to the Old Testament, yeah, maybe around. I don't know exactly, but within a century or a millennia or so, they're in the same neighborhood.
It reflects a lot of what Zeus and his other gods would talk
sure.
about.
Yeah.
Mankind. Well, I'm going to do this to him and see.
Yeah.
It has the same echo to it.
It's not just the Greek gods. I mean, if you've heard of like Gilgamesh, and some of the early, not Canaanite. What's the word I'm looking for? Some of the Babylonian stuff too. But a lot of them have the heavenly court discussing things and saying, go do that.
Use humans as pawns.
Yeah. So that's a little different too from Job compared to the rest of the Bible. That's why I think most folks see Job as a parable or a spiritual folktale of a sort that took on this extra life and taught people and invited people into these tough conversations. But I don't know if there's a historical person named Job. Either way, that's not the point of the story.
I just said it seems like it parallels the same kind of stories that they had
Yeah.
Religions.
Yeah.
Some crossover, I guess,
Or-
I'm gonna say, yeah.
More dance puppets, yeah. So Job does not curse God after that. So the accuser comes back and says, well, let me touch him now. Like give him the boils and all the suffering on his body. And the Lord is like, okay, sure, don't kill him though. But sure, try it now. And so, halfway down page 40 now. Hideous boils appear on Job's body, covering him from head to foot. He is now poor, without progeny, deathly sick. All the marks of a prosperous person are gone. His wife, the one member of his immediate family who was not killed, stands by, angry and disgusted, the mouthpiece of the accuser. Do you still persist in your integrity? She cries. Curse God and die. He refuses, calmly maintaining that one should accept both blessing and curses from the hand of God. From the hand of God. He repairs alone to an ash heap, where he communes with his losses and scrapes his sores with pieces of broken pottery. And then his friends show up. Verse 3, then a fourth one, and they sit with him for 7 days and 7 nights, like a good friend does, right? He said, and then they open their mouths. And then they start saying, well, based on the conventional wisdom, you must have done something. And that's the next section. So the last paragraph of page 40 here. One must pause at this point to formally recognize the ludicrous nature of the story thus far. God making bets at Job's expense, a divine ego battle, it's outrageous. What are we to do with it? I don't know. Several solutions have been proposed, but none fully satisfying. So I offer none. He's not going to try to deal with that, why this is. Instead, I beg you not to let this admittedly outrageous setup turn you away from the riches that await. The poetic meat of the book, up next, is more than enough to satisfy anyone who seeks theological depth in the Okay, I'm going to read one more piece and then something to talk about. So skipping down a little bit, the paragraph that starts the battle, page 41. The battle is framed by the standard equation of reward and punishment. Job, like his friends, interprets calamity as divine discipline or retribution for sin. Yet he's certain of his innocence and proclaims it consistently throughout 36 chapters of dialogue. So he's perplexed. The four friends, they're not. They insist absolutely on the standard wisdom. Job is guilty of sin. Therefore, he'd better just take the lesson and confess. One of the friends tries a discipline angle. He insists that God has done all this to purify Job of iniquity, and that if he quietly accepts his trouble, he will be blessed. Do not despise the discipline of the Almighty, for he wounds, but he binds up. He strikes, but his hands heal. Job stridently rejects this thesis, saying that if he is indeed experiencing divine discipline, it's far beyond the scale of any small sin he might have committed. And the fact is, he committed no sin at all. His friends will have none of it. How long will you say these things? Does God pervert justice? Job steadily and forcefully continues to defend his innocence and eventually demands a trial before God. As Job's words grow increasingly harsh, however, the more convinced his friends become of some hidden guilt. Positions harden, hostility grows as the friends attempt to protect God or their idea of God from the near blasphemous words coming from Job's. Okay. So now that we've got this, contrast from Job, let's go back to the prosperity gospel that, what his friends are arguing. If you live righteously, you're blessed. If something bad is happening, it's because you messed up. You did something wrong. This is your punishment. I think a similar, this is kind of like a theological version of might makes right. Remember that doctrine? We can do what we want because we're the strong ones. We're the strong ones because we're blessed, right? If we're a powerful country, a powerful person, a powerful company, it must be because God wants us to be, so therefore we can do what we want. Kind of that attitude. So, have you wrestled with the why do bad things happen to good people, or the prosperity gospel, or any of that? Where are you at with all of this?
This made me think, no, you're not really old. When I was a freshman in college was when John F. Kennedy was killed.
Mm.
And, you think about what that family, he was killed, they had a son who died. I mean, Robert Kennedy then was shot the next year. There was a rich, famous family that they had a sister who is in a mental hospital. Yeah. I mean, it was a family by all means should have been prosperous and they were famous, and yet they had a lot of things, but especially the mother seemed to never lose her faith, the older Mrs. Kennedy.
Mhm.
What was her
Well,
name?
Well,
Well, yes.
maybe down 2/3 generation or something.
But look, the Rockefellers, they all got their money in. kind of
But
iffy
that's
ways,
what's
too.
fun about it. When I was growing up, I was in high school, right? And that same theory was, but the theory going around then was because of old Joe was having problems with white collar bootlegging out of Canada, and they were getting her up and for that. So that theory is like the good and the bad.
So a lot
You're gonna pay for
A lot of
your-
people wanna think, oh, well, you were bad for this, you deserve
Yeah,
this.
the karma, right?
And that,
Yeah.
and
The family is
that
doing
shouldn't
something
happen
like
to the innocent people in the family, but it does sometimes.
It does, and even in the Ten Commandments, it says, and I will, those who obey my commandments will be blessed to the, third and fourth generation, but those who disobey will be cursed to the 1,000th generation.
That's the theory that's going around now.
So you can think because Joe Kennedy screwed up
Yeah,
his kids.
That's what I was thinking when I was going on.
Sure, or even after Hurricane Katrina, there was, what's because of all that sin in New Orleans. No, they were dead serious stuff. Like, think of all those folks in the Ninth Ward that didn't have the proper levies. Like, were they all sinners? Well, sure, but the way this game plays.
Yeah.
Is, well, their sin was this big, so their disaster was this big. Or after 9/11, there were people who were blaming it on, what was it, pagans and feminists. That's why 9/11 happened. This is some of the stuff that big name Christians got on the TV and said, well, this is God's punishment. That right?
You wonder why the church is declining in America.
So, yeah,
But you look at the back of Job, and it is, you're not gonna answer to why good things happen to that. People want bad things happen to good people.
it's a different scale.
Okay, but there is no human scale that we can measure it on.
Sorry. So we do have something from the New Testament, and I'll narrow it down for you from John's Gospel. Jesus has sort of a response to all of this. In terms of the finding the sin, well, something bad happened to them. Well, what did they do? Why did they deserve this? Like, this is an easy and sometimes fun game to play. Like, we all do it. We see some celebrity that maybe we don't like, and then fall from grace or something happens to them. Like, well, it's because of blah blah blah. Now they're getting their comeuppance, right?
But it's human nature
Oh, sure.
to enjoy somebody powerful.
There's a great German word for it. Schadenfreude. Schadenfreude. It means taking joy at the misfortune of others. The Germans got a word for a lot of things. Have you ever heard of Schadenfreude before?
Never heard the term, but I mean, I'm plenty of people scratch on others and scorching.
You have to ask Erna if she's.
Yeah. All right, so thinking of John's Gospel, a kind of a famous scene with Jesus and involving what?
Who without sin can never sin.
Yeah, so they're all ready to stone this woman caught in adultery. And he writes something on the ground, we never know what. And he says, well, let you who is without sin cast the first stone.
Why is it the women are always accused of adultery in the court? It takes two, and nobody ever accuses the man of it, he probably seduced her.
The laws in the Old Testament on adultery are
Very
slightly
one-sided.
one-sided.
Yes,
Because it's a patriarchal society, just like you go to Iran, it's the same thing.
So yeah, if your woman is worth X amount of rubies, then clearly there's a value on that. So there's that whole like property mindset. We can get into all of that, but the idea is that Jesus kind of resets things through the cross, through the resurrection. As Paul says, everybody sins and falls short of the glory of God. Nothing can separate us from the love of God. So there's this whole new shift by the time we get to the New Testament. So keep that in mind as we go through all of this with Job and over the next couple of weeks, and we'll see where this all plays out. And then also, like I said already, think back to last week in our discussion of how church or our theology speaks or doesn't speak to the messiness of life. Right, so Job's friends are quoting the party line. This is what our teaching is. This is our picture of God. This is what we understand. You just need to confess. And Job is like, I didn't do anything. So that leads us to 3 tensions, starting on page 42. The first tension. Again, I'm just going to read these. I don't want to. I promise I won't do this every week, but these are just. It's just easier to say what he already said. So looking at tradition versus experience, and you could say he got, he references where he got some of these concepts in the footnote there based on some things written in Carol A. Newsom in Women's Bible Commentary. So first one, tradition versus experience. Recently, I was watching television with Julia, my 13-year-old daughter. We were witnessing the slaughter of our Atlanta Braves by the Washington Nationals. As we fell behind 9-2, the ads became the best part of the experience. One of them, I can't remember what it was advertising, was apparently inspired by the story of the 12-year-old phenom Monet Davis. You guys remember her? The first girl to pitch a shutout in the Boys Little League World Series history. And it anticipated a future when a woman would be a starting pitcher for a major league club. And then he reflexively dismissed that possibility, saying, yeah, sure, under my breath. Was he responding to how stacked the system was, and that'll be the day if that ever happens, or was he just being cynical? Who knows? But he said it. And it was quiet, but loud enough for Julia to hear. I knew, even as the words were tripping off the end of my tongue, that it was the perfectly wrong response. I wished to take back my words even before I finished saying them, but of course I couldn't. I apologized to Julia. My callous remark came straight out of a tradition I did not invent. That tradition says certain people can't do certain things. It's common sense, right? Wrong. I didn't invent that sorry tradition, but I did inherit it, and in a small way, my words kept it alive and moved it infinitesimally down the long road of history. I'm not proud of that, but it's the truth. Job's interlocutors, I don't know why he keeps saying that, it's listening.
Yeah, he likes big words.
His companion partners.
He's a college professor.
Yeah, but he's show me the paper's education.
And interlocutor is just a fancy word for conversation partner. So Job's conversation partners also appeal to a tradition they did not invent in their arguments against their beleaguered friend. It's a tradition they accept without question precisely because it favors them, much as the no women in the majors tradition favors me. That tradition, of course, is wisdom a la Proverbs, the culturally approved equation of justice rooted in the righteousness of the sages. So his friend Bildad says, for inquire now of bygone generations and consider what your ancestors found. Will they not teach you and utter words out of their understanding? So that's what everybody knows. It's his argument against Job's innocence. Think now, who that was innocent ever perished? Or where were the upright cut off? Yet late in the argument, the standard tradition is channeled through theological formulas, a sure sign that his friends have disconnected from what is really happening. So there's that disconnect. If you go up to somebody who's lost a child and you say to them, God wanted a little angel.
Oh, I hate that.
Right? But people say that.
Oh, yeah.
And
If that father punches you in the face, he had every right to do it.
but they think but they mean well, right? They think they're saying something of comfort. Or even if it's not a child, which is a whole different level of loss. If you just say to somebody like, well-meaning, and I've said versions of this, but like, well, they're in a better place. That may be true, but is that responding to where they're at right now?
No.
You're saying it because you want to say something. So you're saying it to make you feel better. I said something helpful. But is that actually connecting to where that person is? You wouldn't know if you didn't sit and listen.
Sometimes it's better just to rush and it's coming to me.
And for 7 days, his friends did that. They just sat with him. They sat there with him in his grief and his misery and his helplessness and his confusion. And then they started talking.
honestly, Job's friends get a bad rap.
They do.
They are trying to be helpful
They are.
by their standards, they
They are.
sat with and they are true friends.
Yeah, if they showed up and he was sitting on that thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
As far as he had fallen, they could have avoided him like.
Yeah, which most people would have, so
Yeah.
they get a bad rap.
Right.
They do get a bad rap, but that's their function in the book of Job, right?
Yeah.
Is to be the foils to Job, and then God walks in and you're like, oh, wait. This whole argument we were having just,
Doesn't mean a thing.
yeah. So how are we doing for time?
10.
Okay, we're doing good. Alright, so, tradition versus experience. Okay, continuing on, where are we? Top of 40. Job, of course, is governed by the same traditional equation. In fact, like his friends, he has benefited from it tremendously. To it, he owes a great deal. Without his enormous stake in the standard mathematics of reward and punishment, he wouldn't be so bitter in his demands for divine justice. His amount of outrage and confusion is directly, or I should say, inversely proportionate to the amount he felt. He was way up here, and his bitterness is bigger because of the degree to which he has fallen. Next paragraph. Now he is forced to question the tradition that formed him. The data that drive his questions are of a single type, experience. So he's got his own experience ramming up against the tradition that has shaped his life. Job simply cannot square what he has always known to be true with his experience. It is too much. The old wineskins will not hold. Tradition says he must be guilty, but he knows from experience that he is innocent. Tradition says God must be disciplining him, but he knows this is not true. Tradition says God is just, but experience makes him doubt that God shows any partiality for the innocent. Therefore, one of the central tensions of the book is between these two ways of knowing and what their relative weights should be. Job is 20. Have you, or when have you experienced dissonance personally between tradition, conventional wisdom, whatever you want to call it, and your own personal experience? Everybody says this is how it is, but you're like, not for me.
Question to answer all on the spot.
So here, let me give you an example. I don't know if this is a good example, but it's, I think, in the ballpark. So okay, when I was a kid, I only ever knew one grandparent. 3 of my grandparents had died before I was born, and that was my mom's mom. She was cool. She passed away in 2005, right around Hurricane Katrina. My kids only ever got to know really one of their grandparents, my mom. Well, take that back, my dad, but he's not a very sociable person, so really they only know him. My mom died in 2014, so my older kids were 6, so they have some memories, but not many. Liz's mom got to hold them as babies, but then she had a stroke and she died before they were even. She never got to meet Kate. Now, I look around and I talk to folks who are 20 years older than me talking about their parents. Conventional wisdom would say, well, your parents are there to help you and you have to take care of your parents, right? And they'll babysit the grandkids, things like that. And I remember being in California and having a 70-year-old parishioner who was heading down to San Diego or Hawaii or something to take care of her, 101 and 103-year-old mom and dad. And it just always just hit me. It's just really odd. And it even bothered me a little, if I'm honest. Like it just didn't feel fair, kind of a thing. And no one's fault. It just was what it was. But that for me is a small example of, well, this is how it's supposed to be, right? Or at least, I shouldn't be the exception to this rule. And not just that the kids didn't meet the parents, but that we didn't have the support either. And so that's one.
Well, you can have them still alive and not have support.
That is true.
I was gonna say,
And I get that. That's why it is. That's my personal.
there's several transplants
Yeah.
here, who, they didn't have grandparents around, I didn't have grandparents around.
Yeah.
But I remember, you know, when I went through a divorce, it's like,
Mm.
after 20 years, you know, why is this, I got an apology on his deathbed, but that took several years later. But there's a lot of things in life you, at the time you think it's not fair, but then
Sure.
I look, the things I've gotten to do with the friends I've made since, and, I dated a guy for a while, right after I was divorced, and he was a Vietnam vet. And, after a year or so, he wrote me a letter about how we, and his brother was a big shot in the Lutheran church and a minister, and Dwayne Westerman, I don't, some of you might remember Dwayne Westerman, but, Lee didn't go to church at all. But I afterwards, you know, got a letter, and he talked about how we were there for each other, and we helped walk each other through all these things, so. I doubt if he ever went back to the church, but.
And that brings in some other wisdom, that brings in Ecclesiastes, right? How many times have you heard there's a season for everything? And that's a different part of the wisdom. tradition.
Sometimes you don't like that season at the time.
But it may just be a season. But yeah, if you've ever had that sort of friction between how you think it should be and how it actually is playing out for you in a certain season, then that's you've experienced the same tension that Job has. So now tie this back to the first couple of chapters. For the author, for Paul, he had grown up in the Baptist church, and there was this teaching about who God was and how things were, and this personal Lord and Savior, and this personal relationship. And then as he developed and accumulated these experiences in the world of science and geology and evolution and all that, those two things didn't mesh anymore. And in his case, he at that point in the story, he said, I can't do this part anymore. I'm going to give up on this tradition that I've lived with and that I was taught, because it fundamentally doesn't fit my personal experience. So what's going on in those who are at church or who are unhappy or who got burned by the church? And they're saying, what I was told God was like didn't fit my experience with God's people or the teaching or whatever. There's tension number one.
I think some of that has to come from the Sunday school Jesus or the Sunday school Bible versus the Bible itself, right? Because when, you know, we dig through the Bible and we dig deeper and pull more out, it's like, well, that's not really how the story went. Like the story of Solomon. Not Solomon, Samson. Like Samson, like this hero of the Bible, right? No, he's really not.
He's reckless.
Yeah, he's not a good character to study, right?
Yeah.
And there's all these things that when this, so people learn more like this, so they hear this the Sunday school version, glossed over, nice, everything's good, and then they get to the real world. It's like, well, this isn't really the way it is. So I don't know how to reconcile that, because I don't think we should stop teaching that.
Right.
It's just how do you
Transition
it better?
Which
How do you go from, I'm gonna say Wesley's age to Max's age? I think, how do you get more?
Yeah.
I think it's more dialogue, more conversations outside of church and.
and then tying it to your life. So it's beyond just this academic thing. And now you know the rest of the story, like Paul Harvey.
Yeah.
I mean, Paul Harvey had that line, but he also told stories that really connected with people.
Oh, absolutely.
So how do you do that piece too? And also keep in mind who's the group that Jesus called out the most? Hypocrites, right? Or people who said one thing but then acted a different.
Oh, yeah.
All right, tension number two. Benevolence versus identity, us versus them. So I'm going to try to summarize this one a little bit. Job, part of who he was out of his great wealth, he gave to the needy, right? He supported the widows and the orphans. Paul Wallace tells a story about seeing this homeless person in the same spot every day. And he tries not to make eye contact, right? Because to see the person would mean that, oh, he's a human being too. I maybe need to actually respond and do something about this. So just don't look, and then you can kind of pretend like it's not going on. So Job, I mean, part of his whole identity was how much he supported those in need. And so now he has nothing to give. And so this is halfway down page 45. Chapter 29 is an extended lamentation in which Job pines for the golden days when he was a good and charitable citizen, when he had resources. He supplied what was needed and was loved for it, and how he loved being needed. I was eyes to the blind and feet to the lame. I was a father to the needy. They waited for me as for the rain. They opened their mouths as for the spring rain. Job is pointedly not an everyman. He is the elite, right? His former position at the crown of the social pyramid is essential to the story, for he finds himself suddenly in the opposite location. The inversion is exact. He longs for bygone privilege, but is now stuck below even those he once protected. Regarding them, he cries, but now they mock me in song. They abhor me. They do not hesitate to spit at the sight of me. They have cast off restraint in my presence. The rabble rises up. They send me sprawling, right? Because now he's a cautionary tale for their children. Right? Look at him. He must have done something terrible. Don't be like him. The social system that once buoyed Job looks very different from below. It has turned on him in ways he could not have imagined from his former perch. It's pent up angers and resentments unperceivable from above. Because you're the patron, they're your clients, right? Here, take from my excess and my charity. Aren't you happy now? Doesn't that make everything better? Are all loosed around him and he cannot accept it. Instead, he rails against God for the terrible inversion of his fortune. The tension is extreme. Like me on the exit ramp, staring at the red light, he wants to give to the poor, not be one of the poor. So do you have any experience with that thing, that give to the poor, not be one of the poor? Do you give money to every homeless person? Do you make eye contact with every panhandler?
Again, you gotta consider how you were raised.
Sure.
When I was in college, I panhandled.
Oh, okay.
And we had a place called the Roof Garden. It was at a lake, kind of a lake in the middle of Iowa, which is a big lake. Anyway, yeah, Open Orchard. And
I know Open
they
Orchard.
had, they had a place called the Roof Garden. And what I did when I was a freshman in college, I would go there, and that's what I spent my time. And I would stand out in front of the box office and ask for a quarter. I needed a quarter to get into the dance. And I already had paid my ticket and everything out of it. And once in a while, my pocket would get, and only ask simply for a quarter, right? And every once in a while, my pocket would get deep, so I'd go, I had with the box office girl and cash it in and put dollars in. Well, I would be there about an hour before the dance would start, just asking for a quarter from tourists that came through. And I had $21 or $25 in my pocket when I went upstairs. So I was spending, and that's a lot of money in 1968. So all the blue blood girls that come to that area, I was spending somebody else's money. They thought I was worth a lot of bucks, right? So I know what you can do with
We're working the same.
yeah. So I know what you can do with panhandling. So I revert back to that theory every time you see these people. I think it's a scam, and that's how it comes across to me.
See, I'm the opposite.
Yeah.
I figure if they take advantage of me, shame on them. But I roll down the window. If I've got a buck, I give it to them,
Yeah, that's two different people. I live
And there are scams. I just heard about a scam where this was a recurring scam where somebody uses AI to create the voice of a loved one and calls them up and sets them in a panic. Even before the AI, my mom got roped into one of those once and wired a bunch of
That's
money.
been around.
But they're getting better now. They're getting better at it. So yeah, some people are gonna try to take advantage of you. Some are just down on their luck. But I mean, I remember I've seen this happen before where churches or other service groups will do like an overnight event where they sleep outside, like they try to, there's all these different cardboard boxes to represent the number of homeless people, and they spend the night outside, like trying to put themselves in their shoes. Yeah, that's easy when you know you're gonna, after a day, go back inside. But it's still moving.
In Monroe Park, many years ago, there was a group, Monroe Park out at VCU, when a lot of homeless used to gather, and then there was a group that went down there.
So I mean, think of putting yourselves in other people's shoes. That's harder to do. I mean, if you think about Jesus becoming incarnate, that's exactly what we're talking about here. Jesus becomes one of us to save us. So how do we follow that? The vows of poverty, the Mother Teresa thing, do we need to do that? How do we identify with folks in a different tier from us?
I see the pictures on TV and I know Roger's not gonna be happy with saying this, but you know, there was this road and it was just chock full of immigrants. And they were filming, you know, this whole row of immigrants and, you know, I can't help but feel sorry for them.
Sure.
Because, you know, they're coming to this country to try to live.
Yeah.
And here they are sitting in the outside and, you know, we get to feeling then that if at the beginning that, you know, they're coming to the country because they just are greedy or they, you know, I don't know, are ready to cause some issues, which, you know, you're thinking of these people, it's sitting there, it's hard to not feel like, I wish there was something we could do.
And that's why that's such a sticky issue.
Right, because there are two sides. There was somebody who lived in El Paso, Texas for a while.
Yeah,
Let me tell you, the crime rate,
yeah,
Well,
well, and that's the whole.
and I have a cousin who lives down there, she's a nurse or was a nurse, and she's in the school system. They are just overcrowded with kids who kind of,
And is the
Yeah.
crime rate because of poverty or because there's something inherently wrong with the people coming? Like yeah, it's, and you have compassion, but you don't want to just open it up to everybody.
Compassion to,
Exactly.
compassion to those people that have
All of
had
the above.
generation ranch down there, or compassion to the immigrant trying to get here, so.
All of the
You have
above.
to have passion for both, but it's, and then it's a duality there with those, because the people are coming here to work, which we always complain, we don't have people to work.
Right?
And so there's, you know, and they're nearly a pawn, which is stuff in our political system.
Yeah.
We made them a pawn, just sad, so I mean, how do we do that? I think compassion and
Yeah.
understanding and conversations, instead of yelling and screaming at each other, we can have a conversation about it a little bit more.
And I read something the other day that said that for some politicians, complaining about the problem gets them more votes and more attention than actually trying to solve the problem.
I wouldn't say for some, I would say for all. I think you qualify that very correctly.
Yeah, well, there are many politicians that are just trying to do the work and they're not getting book deals or TV interviews because they're just trying to work, so they're not getting any attention.
Yep.
Alright, the last tension, maintenance versus loss of divine models, okay? So, where are we? Oh, he tells a story about this book that Max Lucado wrote, this children's book. And like you were saying with Sunday school, he's like, this is just too simplistic.
Yep.
This is, you know, it's trying to make God after your own image, right? So God the Father is like me as a father. And so on page 47, where are we? He laughs because he knows the folly of making God in his own image. He did exactly that for many years, but he wasn't a child, nor did he address children. He was very grown up and influential patriarch at the summit of the social order and acted as though God was basically like him, judicious, compassionate, sage, resourceful, devoted to serving the poor. To be fair, if he was confined to modeling God on any individual person, he chose well. Job was a good guy. It's hard to blame him for patterning God on the human being singled out by the true God as uniquely blameless and upright. Right? God is the one who said, "Hey, did you see Job?" It's a good as models go. But Job's losses expose the limits of the model as he struggles to maintain his self-styled divine concept, even as its foundations crack. He remembers his own fair judgments that he gave to the poor or the needy, and he thinks God should do the same for him. Did I ever brush aside the case of my servants, man or maid, when they made a complaint against me? What then should I do when God arises? When he calls me to account, what should I answer? He insists that he himself has granted his servants full protection, which he has. Should not God treat Job just as fairly? He recalls his public judgments at the city gate. I put on righteousness, and it clothed me. My justice was like a robe and a turban. Thinking that God is like him, a fair and rational and compassionate judge, he resorts to legal language throughout the book. At times, he explicitly demands a trial. Right, skipping down. Job has no return. He's losing his God. That's pretty heavy. It's not just that he's lost his identity. It's not just that he's lost his tradition. He's losing his God. A hard moment when your best idea of God collapses, because for that same moment it looks for all the world like it is God that's collapsing. Job is at the end. He has lost his family, his wealth, his health. The tradition of wisdom that formed him and made him good is threatened in the face of raw experience. The social system he once ruled has turned on him. His generosity toward the poor, which once brought him respect among his people, is beginning to look like mere paternalism. Finally, his very idea of God is cracking under the burden of his losses. He's on the edge of losing his mind and his God along with it. He longs for death. Then God speaks. This makes me think of, I can't tell you how many times I've heard it, somebody recovers from an illness. Our prayers were answered. And then I can't help but think on some level of the people who were praying just as hard, and that cancer didn't go into remission, or that person didn't make it through the surgery, or whatever it was. So, if you got to be careful on how you model your idea of God, because it could turn back on you if your experience, if your life goes a different way. But yeah, we model our ideas of God just the same way.
So should we not thinking? And lots of prayers in here.
Yeah. I think that God answers all prayers, not always the ways that we expect, or on the timetable we expect. And I think we can be thankful when healing comes, and then we also are challenged to be thankful when it doesn't, and to reframe our expectations right.
That's hard to do.
It's very hard to do.
I guess that's what's happening.
Yeah,
Because
yeah,
God let that happen.
right. So if you have this idea that God micromanages, that everything happens for a reason, which I don't think is scriptural.
No, I don't think that's go either. I know from experience it's not.
Yeah. If something bad happens to you, then you start wondering what the reason is. And you either come around to something like, well, I must have done something wrong. Or it starts to affect who you see God as. And it's a hard balance. I don't want to take anything away from people who've experienced healing and who had prayers. The Thanksgiving, I think, is in the fact that you have people there with you, praying for you at your side. And that's for the people who don't get better. You can be thankful that you have people praying for you, with you at your side.
That's what really counts.
And the promise that this life is not the end, that there's something more, that there is a promise of a heaven where there is no more tears, no more disease, no more pain, no more death. But yeah, that's not how we're kind of conditioned.
Yeah, exclusive of the turnout, of the final turnout is the fact that people were with you through that ordeal. Makes more sense to me than what the final outcome is.
But especially in our society, we're conditioned to say, if you work hard, you can win. And that death is a win-lose situation, right? We beat death, we beat cancer. We don't say that about other diseases so much, but that if you die, you somehow lose. And Christians, that should not be our perspective. Death has been defeated already. That's a tricky one. What Job is experiencing is on a whole nother scale, and that's that extreme contrast that Job experiences from here down to where he ends up drives the whole story up to this point of having God speak and respond. So Job is losing his God. I don't know if this is one we want to do. We're out of time. We're over now. But here's a hard thing to chew on this week, especially with Thanksgiving, right? It's a weird contrast. But what might make you lose your God? What would challenge your faith or your picture of who God is in a similar way to what Job was experiencing? So that means first thinking to yourself, well, what is the picture of my God? A lot of times we don't reflect on that, but so think about, well, who is God? What would challenge that? What would knock that concept in? In what ways have those who have actively or passively stopped being involved in church or religion, in what ways have they lost their God? What was the picture they were given that they grew up with, the tradition, their identity, all the things that Job was doing right now? What was it that may have happened to them to make them just say, I can't anymore, or just fade? So that's the thing to chew on. That's the thing I want us to hold in our minds as we get into this. So, as I said, I won't do that much reading coming up. The next chapter is called An Ash Heap with a View. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.